So far, we've talked about how to determine if something is considered living and how living things function with their biochemical compounds. Today, we're going to talk about how to classify living things. And so, the science of classifying living things is called taxonomy. And this helps us organize the complex diversity of life on Earth. Modern scientists classify organisms based on their molecular similarities, so they're looking at their DNA and their proteins and seeing how two different organisms are similar with their DNA and their proteins, and then how they are different. This process shows how they can be descendants from a common ancestor from in the past. So before we got to this modern way of classifying, we had a scientist by the name of Carl Linnaeus, and he is the father of taxonomy, and he came up with a way of organizing organisms based on their physical appearances. And he created something called taxa, or these are just groups or categories. And so this is a very brief snippet. We have species is a taxa, genus is a taxa, family is a taxa, order, class, and then the last two look like they got cut off, but it's phylum, and then lastly we have kingdom. And so this column takes you through how humans are classified according to the Linnaeus system. And so they belong to kingdom Animalia and phylum Chordata. The class is mammals, order primates, family hominids, genus Homo, and then the species is sapiens. And so each one of these gets to be a little bit more specific than the previous one. So, to recap, kingdom is the broadest category in the Linnaean system, and there are 4 kingdoms. We have the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungus kingdom, and the protist kingdom. Each of those 4 kingdoms get further divided into a phylum. There's many, many phylums in each kingdom, and this consists of 1 or more classes. Classes are a little more specific than a phylum. And it will contain orders. Orders are below class, and they consist of 1 or more families. Then we have families, which is a little more specific than an order. And then we have genuses, which are more specific than families. And then lastly, we have species. And species is the narrowest or most specific taxon in biological classification, and they will only have 1 organism. And these organisms have to be able to breed and produce fertile offspring with each other, but not with other members of other such groups. So by fertile offspring, that means that the fertile offspring have the ability to reproduce instead of not being able to reproduce. This order, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, this order is you need to memorize it. So this would be the broadest to the most specific. And I don't care if you remember it from the specific to the broadest or the broadest to the specific. It's up to you. One way to kind of remember this is the little acronym King Philip came over for good spaghetti. Well, however you spell it, it reminds me of my grandma. She could never spell it either. So K, king, for kingdom. P, Philip, phylum. C, for class or came over. Then you work your way down to species or spaghetti. Binomial nomenclature is a method of naming species. This was introduced by Linnaeus, in which each species is given a unique 2-word name consisting of its genus and species name. So two-word name is kind of a given away in the prefix binomial. The prefix bi refers to the number 2. Usually your scientific name is written in Latin. If you are on a digital device, it will always be italicized, which is a slanty font. And the genus is always capitalized. So for example, here we have Homo sapiens. Notice how it's italicized. Here we have the genus, and that is capitalized, starts with a capital H. And the second one here is the species. So that's for humans' scientific name. And this last one, Canis lupus, is for a wolf. And so anything related to a wolf will be Canis something. So Canis lupus refers to wolf, and Canis latrans refers to a coyote. So you can see that because they both have Canis in their name, they're related, but their species is different, so they're not identical. Prior to Linnaeus coming up with this system, there was no consistent way to name species, so often scientists gave different names to the same species. So with the advancement of modern science and the ability to look at DNA and proteins, scientists realized that there was a need for an even broader category, bigger than kingdom, and this is the domain. Domain is the broadest taxon in modern biological classification, and it consists of one or more kingdoms. And they came really about because we didn't know anything about microorganisms because we couldn't see them in the 1700s when Linnaeus was doing his work. So as science advanced with the invention of microscopes and more powerful microscopes, scientists discovered many single-celled organisms that didn't fit into Linnaeus' system. So there are 3 domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. And so here we have the 3 domains. And so you can see that organisms in archaea and bacteria are single-celled, and eukarya has multicellularity. Bacteria and archaea also have cell walls, and their biggest difference is archaea has it made without a compound called peptidoglycan, where bacteria's cell walls has peptidoglycan in them. Eukarya, some organisms such as plants and fungus and some protists have a cell wall, but animal cells do not. If there's a nucleus present, both bacteria and archaea do not. However, all organisms in domain eukarya have a nucleus. And the presence of cell organelles, like little organs inside the cell, they are only present in, again, eukarya and not bacteria and archaea. So the biggest difference in archaea and bacteria is how their cell wall is put together with what chemicals and which molecules are found in it. So archaea and bacteria, there's only single-celled organisms. They both have cell walls, however, they are made out of different materials, and their cells do not have a nucleus. Eukarya, some are single-celled, but most are multicellular. They have some cell walls, while others do not. And then bacteria and archaea may seem more similar based on these comparisons. However, archaea may actually be more closely related to eukarya because we've been able to examine their DNA, and there's more similarities between eukarya DNA and archaea DNA than bacteria. So this usually brings up the topic of viruses. So viruses are DNA or RNA surrounded by a coat of proteins that use living cells to reproduce and can evolve, but many scientists do not consider them to be living. They don't view them as a cell, they don't use energy, and they don't respond to stimuli. They cannot grow and they cannot maintain homeostasis. So all of these are the characteristics of living things. And so, since viruses don't have those things, many scientists do not believe that viruses should be considered living. They cannot reproduce on its own. They need to infect a living host. And so they do have genetic material which allows them to evolve. And so viruses are kind of the gray area on living versus non-living. And so here's just a couple images of viruses. HIV is a virus, hepatitis B, the Ebola virus, the adenovirus, which I believe causes like your common colds, your influenza virus, and then a bacteriophage, which is a virus that infects a bacteria.